Howard Lam granted bail following his court appearance. And Donald Trump disbands 2 business councils after CEOs quit in protest over his Virginia violence remarks.
Good evening and welcome. Another 3 activists were today given prison terms, even after they had served their original sentences. Joshua Wong, Nathan Law, and Alex Chow received jail sentences ranging from 6 to 8 months for storming a fenced-off area at the government headquarters. That incident subsequently triggered the Occupy movement 3 years ago. Elmi Long was at the courthouse.
An emotional farewell even before the verdict was delivered.
People united will never be defeated. I believe there's no reason for anyone that are not in prison to give up or step backward. Keep on to fight. We love Hong Kong.
The Court of Appeal, after reviewing the trio's original sentences, noted that Hong Kong citizens' freedom of expression, including the right to protest and march, is not absolute or without restrictions. The 3 defendants, all core members of youth groups, decided to force their way into the East Wing forecourt of the central government offices to regain what they called Civic Square. 10 security guards were injured in the process. Today, the court said deterrent sentences must be handed down to prevent them and others from repeating such actions. As such, the court deemed immediate imprisonment as an appropriate penalty. Given that Joshua Wong and Nathan Law already completed their community service, as previously ordered by a magistrate who found them guilty of unlawful assembly, Joshua Wong's jail term was reduced to 6 months. Alex Chow, 7 months. For inciting others to take part in an unlawful assembly, Nathan Law was sentenced to 8 months in jail. Law, the city's youngest ever democratically elected legislator, was disqualified last month in a separate court case.
It is a shame that the government responded to the demands for democracy with indifference and arrogance.
Alex Chow's father said he's heartbroken, but is still proud of his son and wishes him a happy birthday tomorrow. Amnesty International called the jail terms a vindictive attack on the freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. Pro-government supporters, though, think the sentences are too lenient and the activists deserve at least a year in jail. Under existing laws, those with jail terms of more than 3 months are barred from running for political office in the next 5 years. This means that Joshua Wong, who previously expressed an interest to become a lawmaker, can't qualify as a candidate in the upcoming by-elections or the next legislative election in 2020. Elmi Long, TVB News.
In other court news, Democratic Party member Howard Lam has been released on bail after appearing in court earlier today to face a charge of misleading a police officer. Lam was arrested early Tuesday, and just a few days after he told a press conference that he was abducted and tortured last week. Winner Wong reports.
Howard Lam did not answer any questions from reporters when he emerged from the Kowloon City Magistrates Court today. But he did say that although there are many things on his mind, he had been advised by his lawyer not to talk about the case. The Mid-Autumn Festival is coming up. I hope everyone in the world can be with their families, be at peace, and live without disaster till the end of their days, he said. Lam was wheeled out of Queen Elizabeth Hospital's custodial ward at around 11:30 this morning. Police had originally said the 42-year-old would not be able to appear in court today because he was feeling unwell. But his doctor later declared him fit to leave the hospital. In court, the prosecution asked for an adjournment to enable further police investigations. It also said it would not object to Lam being released on bail, although he should not be allowed to leave the city. Lam's lawyer, meanwhile, asked the judge to let his client leave for America in September. That's because Lam has been accepted into Yale Divinity School, and he needs to be there to complete the registration procedure. Lam's lawyer pointed out that his client does not have a criminal record, and all his assets are in Hong Kong, so he is unlikely to abscond. Magistrate Peter Law adjourned the case until September 14th and released Lam on $5,000 bail. However, Lam must not leave Hong Kong during this time and must report to the police twice a week, which means it's unlikely he'll be able to leave for school on time. Lam returned to Queen Elizabeth Hospital after the court session, accompanied by fellow party members. Winna Wong, TVB News.
A man plunged to his death after falling off a building in Central this morning. He was taking pictures on the refuge floor of the building at the time of the incident. Tragedy struck on Lee Yun Street East at around 9 this morning. The man was found lying unconscious on the podium of Lee Dong building. Sources say he was a 25-year-old fitness coach who operated a gym in the building. He was taking promotional photos of 2 other fitness trainers on the 12th floor. That's the refuge floor of the 29-story building. The man reportedly climbed onto a 1.5-meter tall railing and accidentally fell off the building, landing on the 4th floor podium. Paramedics certified him dead at the scene. The death was deemed not suspicious by the authorities.
Turning overseas now, and US President Donald Trump has disbanded 2 high-profile business advisory councils. This comes after several prominent CEOs quit them in protest against Trump's remarks blaming weekend violence in Virginia on both white supremacists and anti-racism activists. Alan Buckner reports.
Facing an all-out rebellion by CEOs he once called colleagues, President Trump announced on Twitter, rather than putting pressure on business people of the Manufacturing Council and the Strategy and Policy Forum, I am ending both. The announcement came after CEOs of 8 prominent companies quit in protest over Trump's comments blaming both sides for the weekend violence in Charlottesville, Virginia, that left 1 person dead and almost 20 injured. High-ranking Republicans are also lining up against Trump's stance, with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Senator Lindsey Graham, and Governor John Kasich all rebuking the president. Former Presidents George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush also joined in, saying America must always reject racial bigotry, anti-Semitism, and hatred in all forms. Standing by Trump, however, is Vice President Mike Pence, who is on a visit to Chile.
What happened in Charlottesville was a tragedy. And the President has been clear on this tragedy, and so have I. And I stand with the President, and I stand by those words.
A memorial was held in Charlottesville for Heather Heyer, who was killed when a car reportedly driven by a Nazi sympathizer plowed into a crowd of counter-protesters.
No father should have to do this. But I love my daughter. And as I look out on you guys, you loved her too. She was kind of hard that way. It's hard not to love.
Meanwhile, cities across the U.S. are removing Confederate monuments, seen as symbols of American slavery days. The violence in Virginia was sparked by a protest against the planned removal of such a monument. In Birmingham, Alabama, where legislation prohibits the removal of rebel memorials, the city's mayor ordered one covered up. Alan Buckner, TVB News.
And a global survey just released shows the Russian president is more trusted than Donald Trump to do the right thing for the world. The survey by the well-respected Pew Research Center polled people in 37 countries. Neither leader did particularly well. Globally, about 60% of respondents said they lack confidence in Vladimir Putin, with European nations most skeptical. For Trump, it was almost 80% who said they lack confidence. It was especially high among NATO countries that are reliant on the US for defense. Trump had earlier questioned the validity of NATO and was slow to affirm the alliance's mutual defense pact.
Well, the United States won't settle for cosmetic changes to the North American Free Trade Agreement. Those remarks from the top U.S. trade negotiator came as negotiations to rework terms of the pact began. President Donald Trump has called the 23-year-old trade pact the worst in history and vowed to fix it or withdraw from it. NAFTA did away with most barriers, including tariffs on trade between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. Meanwhile, union and farmer groups marched in front of the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City to protest the legacy of NAFTA and its renegotiation. They say the pact has not benefited their country. Mexico wants to maintain preferential access for its goods and services to the U.S. and Canada, where nearly 85% of its exports are shipped. South Korea's president says North Korea would be crossing a red line if it puts a nuclear warhead on an intercontinental ballistic missile. The remarks came as U.S. Vice President Mike Pence urged Latin American countries to help turn up the economic pressure on North Korea. During a meeting with Chile's president, Pence said the U.S. and its allies are beginning to see progress on North Korea. Pence urged Chile, Brazil, Mexico, and Peru to break all diplomatic and commercial ties with North Korea.
The ongoing economic and diplomatic pressure is being brought to bear by our allies in the region, by allies here in Latin America, and renewed pressure by China itself is resulting in what we believe represent glimmers of hope that we can achieve by peaceable means that which nations around the world have sought on the Korean Peninsula now for decades.
North Korea has no diplomatic offices or banking institution in Chile, but the two countries do have a trade relationship. North Korea has indicated that leader Kim Jong-un delayed a decision on firing missiles towards the U.S. Pacific territory of Guam while he waits to see what the U.S. does next. Whatever that is, it won't be military action, at least not without Seoul's approval. South Korean President Moon Jae-in offered that assurance today as he urged North Korea not to make further provocations. Moon said the North would face much tougher sanctions if it persists with its nuclear weapons development. And for the first time, he specified that Pyongyang would be crossing a red line if it puts a nuclear warhead on an intercontinental ballistic missile. In another effort to jumpstart diplomacy, Moon added he would consider sending an envoy to North Korea. Meanwhile, in Beijing, the visiting chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff reaffirmed after meeting with his Chinese counterparts that the U.S. and South Korea will go ahead with joint military drills next week. China has called for the scrapping of the drills in exchange for North Korea halting its weapons programs. But U.S. officials insist the exercises are key to maintaining the alliance's defensive ability as long as the threat exists.
Still ahead in the news. Welcome back. The late rural leader Lau Wong-fat was laid to rest today in his ancestral village in Tunmun. Past and present leaders from the world of politics and business gave the man dubbed King of New Territories a VIP send-off.
The list of those invited to Lau's funeral this morning read like a who's who of Hong Kong's political and business circles. Among them, Chief Secretary for Administration Matthew Cheung, Justice Secretary Rim Ski-yun, as well as leaders of the Liberal Party, the DAB and the Business Professionals Alliance for Hong Kong. They gathered at the Hong Kong Funeral Home in North Point to pay their final respects to the man dubbed the King of New Territories. Lau had been chairman of the rural body Heung Yi Kuk for 30 years. The 10 pallbearers included former Chief Executive Tung Chee-hwa, current CE Carrie Lam, and the Central Government's Liaison Office Chief Jiang Xiaoming. Lau's family had requested that no media be allowed inside the funeral hall to cover the Buddhist service. At around 10:30, Kenneth Lau and his younger brother Francis carried their father's photo out of the funeral parlour. The hearse was then driven to the Heung Yi Kuk building in Sha Tin, where Lau's widow Ng Mui Chu and relatives were joined by 27 village heads for a public memorial service. Lau was instrumental in resolving differences during construction of the Big Buddha on Lantau, and had helped villagers from Choi Yun Tsun, which was levelled in 2010 to make way for the construction of the high-speed rail link. His efforts were praised in eulogies by his friends and family. Chung Wai-ping, chairman of the Chunwan District Council, paid tribute to the man he called a legend whose legacy will live on. Lau's youngest son, Francis, noted that the best way to remember his father would be as someone who united the people of the New Territories. He added that he didn't agree with media reports, which said the passing of his father would mean the disintegration of the New Territories. If my dad heard that, he would dismiss it and say they didn't understand, he said. Lau's hearse then passed by Tin Hau Temple in Tuen Mun. Later in the afternoon, a public memorial service was held in his home village of Lung Ku Tan. He was then laid to rest at the ancestral graveyard on a hillside in Lung Ku Tan village.
Turning overseas again, in the Central American nation of Guatemala, suspected gang members armed with assault rifles stormed a hospital to free an associate who was taken there for a checkup. The attack left 7 people dead and 12 others injured. Roosevelt Hospital is one of the largest hospitals in Guatemala. The attack took place yesterday morning when a gang member who'd been jailed since 2013 went to the hospital under police supervision for lab tests. Among the people killed were 3 security guards and a hospital janitor. Police arrested 5 of the 7 assailants, but the convict escaped during the chaos. Guatemalan President Jimmy Morales said the search for those responsible will continue and they will see the law enforced.
Venezuela's new chief prosecutor has outlined corruption accusations against his predecessor, Luisa Ortega, her husband, and members of her team of prosecutors. Ortega, who has accused President Nicolas Maduro of human rights abuses, was fired and replaced by Tarek Saab during the first meeting of the newly created Constituent Assembly. The targeting of Ortega comes as concern spreads that the all-powerful Constituent Assembly will deepen a crackdown on Maduro's opponents. A truth commission set up by the Assembly says it will investigate politicians it considers responsible for violent protests that left more than 120 people dead and many more injured. Meanwhile, the attorney for a young violinist who became a symbol of anti-government protests says he was beaten and subjected to psychological torture. The 23-year-old has been released after spending 3 weeks in prison.
British parliamentary officials say they want to review plans to silence Big Ben for 4 years during repair work. The 13.7 metric ton bell has sounded the time almost uninterrupted since 1859, even surviving German bombing raids. When repairs were announced last year, officials said it would be silenced for several months. This week, they said the silencing would last until 2021 to ensure the safety of the workers. British Prime Minister Theresa May said she wants that reviewed.
Well, of course, we want to ensure that people are safe at work, but it can't be right for Big Ben to be silent for 4 years. Of course, this is a House of Commons matter, and I hope that the Speaker, as chairman of the House of Commons Commission, will urgently look into this and ensure that we can hear Big Ben through those 4 years.
If they realised exactly the aspects of scaffolding and putting up a 100-metre high scaffolding and how scaffolding crews work, I'm sure they would see that we're absolutely right and correct to do that.
Okay, from Big Ben to the big guns of tennis.
Yeah, wow, nice. Yeah, tennis.